He thought of her tired eyes and the way her voice cracked when she told him about borrowing money from her sister. Still, the thought of leaving Ward 6C, leaving Lisa, felt unbearable. Here, he wasn't a husband with bills and responsibilities. He was lusting after Nurse Lisa because of the secret service he rendered to them. Under the soft glow of the hospital hallway lights, Nurse Lisa walked into Ward 6C, exuding an aura of effortless confidence. The faint hum of monitors and the distant rustle of papers faded into a quiet symphony, her presence commanding the room's attention. Lisa's steps were unhurried, her polished white shoes clicking softly against the gleaming tiles. Her uniform was immaculate, hugging her form in a way that was professional yet undeniably elegant, while her floral perfume left a faint trace of sweetness in the sterile air. Lisa had an almost magical ability to change the mood of a space. Patients who moments earlier had been groaning with pain now straightened in their beds, eyes lighting up as if she carried a spark of hope. Her voice, warm and melodic, wrapped around each name she called out, turning the mundane act of roll call into something personal and affirming. "Has the pain today, Mr. Carter?" she asked, her tone gentle but attentive. A simple nod from the elderly man seemed to brighten the entire ward. St. Jude Orthopedic Center was renowned across Chicago for its cutting-edge medical care, but Ward 6C had earned a unique reputation that even the hospital glossy brochures didn't cover. This wasn't just a place of recovery. It was the domain of Nurse Lisa, a woman whose charisma had turned a sterile ward into a space that felt almost magical. Stories of her charm had circulated far and wide, whispered by discharged patients to friends and family. Those lucky enough to experience her care firsthand spoke of her like a legend. Tonight was no different. As Lisa moved gracefully between the beds, her every gesture seemed deliberate, her smile effortless yet impactful. The patients responded to her like flowers turning toward the sun, their spirits momentarily lifted despite their physical ailments. But behind the perfection of her nightly rounds was a layer of complexity that no one in the ward suspected. Lisa's world was far from the simple image she projected, and the glow she brought toward 6C came at a personal cost. The patients unaware of the intricate story she carried within her. Soon, however, the layers of her life would begin to unravel, and the truth would ripple through Ward 6C in ways none of them could foresee. When Nurse Lisa walked out of Ward 6C at the end of her shift, the confident persona she displayed began to peel away like a mask. The glow of the hospital hallway lights was replaced by the dim, flickering bulb in the underground parking garage. Lisa's steps slowed as she reached her car, a modest sedan that had seen better days. She leaned against the door for a moment, exhaling deeply. The weight she carried, invisible to her patients, pressed heavily on her now. Driving through the quiet streets of Chicago, Lisa's thoughts wandered to Adam. Her husband had been a patient at St. Jude's for 3 years now, ever since the car accident that had shattered his spine and their dreams of an ordinary life. Before the accident, Adam had been her anchor, a man full of life and humor who could make her laugh even on her worst days. Now he was confined to a hospital bed, dependent on round-the-clock care, his once vibrant spirit dulled by years of pain and immobility. Lisa's nightly routines in Ward 6C were more than just a way to cheer up her patients. They were a desperate attempt to gather the money she needed to fund Adam's next surgery. Insurance only covered so much, and their savings had been drained long ago. Every smile, every sway of her hips during her evening performances was a carefully calculated effort to earn tips from the infatuated patients who lingered in her ward far longer than they needed to. As she pulled into her driveway, Lisa stared at the small apartment she now called home. The peeling paint and creaking stairs were reminders of everything she sacrificed to keep Adam's care afloat. Stepping inside, she was greeted by silence, save for the gentle hum of the ventilator in the corner of the living room where Adam's hospital bed stood. His eyes flickered open as she approached, and for a moment, the corners of his lips turned upward in a weak smile. "You are home," Adam said, his voice barely above a whisper. Lisa leaned over to kiss his forehead, her heart aching as she took in his frail frame. "How was your day?" she asked softly, adjusting the blanket that covered him. He replied, "The nurse was nice, though. She read me a chapter from that book you bought." Lisa nodded, biting back tears. She wanted to tell him about her own day, about the men in Ward 6C who worshipped her for the persona she wore like armor, but she couldn't. The Lisa they adored wasn't the same Lisa standing here, her heart breaking every time she looked at Adam. Before bed, she logged into her bank account, her stomach sinking at the sight of the dwindling balance. The surgery was still far out of reach. Closing her laptop, she sat in the dark, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow she would put on the uniform, the perfume, and the smile again. For Adam, she would keep the act going, even if it meant losing pieces of herself along the way. The men of Ward 6C weren't just patients recovering from injuries. They were a motley crew of characters, each with a story as unique as the scars they carried. Mike, a construction worker with a fractured arm, had a booming laugh that could fill the entire ward. Despite his jovial nature, his eyes often betrayed the weight of his struggles outside the hospital. He has an overworked girlfriend, mounting bills, and a gnawing fear of losing his job. Todd, on the other hand, was a sharp-tongued salesman whose perfectly healed leg didn't stop him from milking his hospital stay. His wife Susan visited daily, bringing homemade meals and gentle admonishments about coming home. But Todd always found an excuse to stay. The truth, though he'd never admitted aloud, was that he'd grown addicted to the nightly entertainment Lisa provided, an escape from his responsibilities and the suffocating guilt of knowing how much Susan had sacrificed for him. There were others too. Greg, a shy college student recovering from a knee surgery, found solace in Lisa's encouraging words. And Mr. Henson, a retired teacher with a gruff exterior, softened whenever Lisa adjusted his pillows with her practiced care. Each man had his reasons for lingering in Ward 6C, and at the center of it all was Lisa. By day, they exchanged banter and swapped stories, their camaraderie growing stronger with each passing week. But by night, when the clock struck 11, a different energy filled the air. The men waited with bated breath for Lisa's arrival, their anticipation palpable. For them, it wasn't just the routine, it was a performance, a respite from their pain, and a chance to feel alive again. At exactly 11 p.m., Lisa entered Ward 6C with a portable speaker in hand. Tonight's playlist was a mix of smooth jazz and sultry R&B, the kind of music that could transport anyone to another world. As the first notes played, she swayed gently, her movements deliberate yet understated. "Good evening, gentlemen," she greeted, her voice as warm as the dim lights that bathed the room. "Good evening, Nurse Lisa," they replied in unison, their voices filled with excitement. Lisa began her rounds, tending to each patient with practiced ease. When she reached Mike, he grinned sheepishly and pointed to his shoulder. "Acting up again, Nurse Lisa? Think you can work your magic?" She laughed softly, retrieving a heat pad from her cart. "Magic doesn't come free, Mike," she teased, holding out her hand. Mike fumbled for his wallet, producing a crumpled $20 bill. Lisa accepted it with a wink, her touch light as she applied the pad to his shoulder. The others watched, envious yet amused, each secretly hoping they'd be next in line for her attention. Across town, Mike's girlfriend, Emily, sat at her kitchen table, staring at her phone. The messages from Mike had grown increasingly vague over the past few weeks. Every time she asked about his recovery, he assured her it was taking longer than expected. Yet something didn't add up. She opened her banking app, scrolling through the transactions. The steady stream of withdrawals labeled hospital expenses gnawed at her. Mike's insurance should have covered most of his treatment, so why did he keep asking for money? Emily resolved to get answers. If Mike wouldn't tell her the truth, she'd find it herself. She picked up her keys, her mind made up. Todd stared at the text from Susan on his phone. "When are you coming home?" He sighed, guilt twisting in his gut. He knew she was exhausted, juggling her job and their household while he stayed here, indulging in the nightly performances and Lisa's attention. He thought of her tired eyes and the way her voice cracked when she told him about borrowing money from her sister. Still, the thought of leaving Ward 6C, leaving Lisa felt unbearable. Here, he wasn't a husband with bills and responsibilities. He was lusting after Nurse Lisa because of the secret service he rendered to them. "Lisa," he called as she walked by. "Think my leg might need some extra TLC tonight?" Lisa glanced at him knowingly, her smile never wavering. "Tips first, Todd," she said with a playful lilt. Todd laughed nervously, fishing out his wallet. "Worth every penny," he muttered, handing her a crisp $50 bill. Tonight's routine was different. Lisa's movements were slower, more deliberate, and her smile seemed a little more forced. The men didn't notice. They were too caught up in the spell she wove with every sway of her hips. But Lisa felt it, the weight of her choices pressing down on her. As she danced, her mind drifted to Adam, lying alone in their apartment. She thought of the surgery she couldn't afford and the life they'd lost. The guilt was a constant companion, but she buried it deep, focusing on the faces of the men before her. For them, she was a fantasy. For Adam, she was reality, and she couldn't fail him. Mike noticed at first a flicker of something in Lisa's eyes as she ended her routine and returned to her cart. Her usual cheer seemed dimmer, her movements less fluid. "You okay, Nurse Lisa?" he asked, concern lacing his voice. Lisa hesitated before nodding. "Just a long day, Mike. Nothing I can't handle." But the crack in her facade planted a seed of doubt in Mike's mind. Who was Lisa really, and what was she hiding? Emily arrived at St. Jude's Orthopedic Center late at night, her heart pounding as she approached the reception desk. The hospital smelled of antiseptic, the air thick with an eerie quietness. She asked for directions toward 6C, determined to see Mike and get the answers he had been avoiding. As she made her way through the winding corridors, her anger gave way to apprehension. What if Mike wasn't just lying about the money? What if something else was going on? Her thoughts raced as she approached the ward, the muffled sound of music growing louder with each step. When she reached the door, the sight inside froze her in her tracks. There was Mike, laughing with a nurse who was dancing with her in a compromising, swaying to the rhythm of jazz music, her figure lit by the soft glow of the overhead lights. Emily's chest tightened as she took in the scene, the way Mike looked at the nurse, the way everyone seemed entranced by her. "Mike!" Emily's voice rang out, cutting through the music like a knife. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to Emily. Mike's face went pale as he stammered. "Emily, what are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" Emily snapped, stepping closer. "What are you doing here? I've been sending you money for your treatment, and this is what you've been spending it on." She gestured at Lisa, her voice trembling with anger. Lisa, ever composed, stepped forward. "Ma'am, perhaps we should discuss this outside." "No," Emily interrupted, her glare fixed on Mike. "I want answers, now." Mike tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. The other patients watched in awkward silence, the spell Lisa had cast now shattered. Lisa felt the walls closing in. Emily's outburst wasn't just embarrassing, it was a threat to the delicate balance she'd worked so hard to maintain. She knew the truth would come out eventually, but not like this, not in front of everyone. "I think it's best if I leave for the night," Lisa said, her voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around her. Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked out, her composure intact but her heart racing. As she left the ward, Lisa knew this was the beginning of the end. The next day, Ward 6C buzzed with rumors. Patients speculated about the confrontation, their imaginations running wild. Had Nurse Lisa been fired? Was she involved in something illegal? The head nurse, Mrs. Williams, called a meeting to address the growing tension. "Nurse Lisa has decided to resign," she announced, her tone firm. "She has her reasons, and I expect all of you to respect her privacy." The men in Ward 6C exchanged guilty glances, the weight of their actions sinking in. Later that afternoon, Mrs. Williams sat down with the ward's most persistent patients. "I think it's time you all knew the truth," she began, her voice softer than usual. She explained Lisa's situation, her husband Adam, the accident that had changed their lives, and the financial strain that had driven Lisa to take unconventional mental measures. "Every dollar she earned went toward his care," Mrs. Williams said. "She's been doing everything she can to save him." The room fell silent as the weight of her words settled over them. Mike couldn't meet anyone's gaze. He thought of Emily, of the trust he'd broken, and the sacrifices she'd made for him. Todd felt a similar pang of guilt, picturing Susan's tired face and the nights she'd spent alone while he indulged in Lisa's attention. Greg and Mr. Henson, too, were lost in their thoughts, each grappling with the realization that they'd taken Lisa's kindness for granted. Emily sat alone in her apartment, replaying the events of the previous night in her mind. She wanted to be angry at Mike, but more than anything, she felt betrayed. When Mike called, she hesitated before answering. "Emily, I'm sorry," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been an idiot. I didn't mean to hurt you." Emily sighed. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Mike, but I hope you've learned something from all this." Todd sat in the hospital bed, his phone heavy in his hands as he stared at the unread message from Susan. "We need to talk." He had avoided replying all morning, but he knew he couldn't run from her any longer. When Susan arrived later that day, her face was set in a grim expression. "Do you have any idea what I've sacrificed to keep you here?" Susan's voice wavered, a mix of anger and exhaustion. "I borrowed money from my sister. I sold my grandmother's ring, and for what? So you could throw our savings at—" She paused, her voice trembling. "At some fantasy?" Todd swallowed hard, guilt choking him. "I was wrong, Susan. I don't know what else to say except I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't fix this," she snapped. "You're coming home, and you're going to figure out how to pay back every penny." Todd nodded, knowing he had no choice. For the first time in weeks, he realized how much he had taken Susan for granted. Mike couldn't stop replaying Emily's words in his mind. "I've been paying your bills while you're here throwing money at this." The shame of her discovery weighed on him like a stone. He had to make things right, but he didn't know where to start. He called Emily that evening, his voice shaky. "Emily, I know I've messed up. I got caught up in something I didn't understand, but I need you to know it wasn't just about Lisa. It was about escaping the fear of losing everything outside this hospital." Emily sighed on the other end of the line. "Mike, I loved you because you were honest and hardworking, but this isn't the man I fell for. I need time to think about whether we have a future." Mike nodded silently, tears streaming down his face. He realized that rebuilding trust with Emily would take more than words. It would take actions. Greg, the shy college student, found himself reflecting on Lisa's kindness. While the others had vied for her attention, Lisa had treated him like a little brother, encouraging him to focus on his recovery. "I'm going to finish my degree," Greg vowed to himself, "and I'll do it with the same determination Lisa showed every night." He began spending his days reading and planning for his future, grateful for the clarity the experience in Ward 6C had given him. The retired teacher, Mr. Henson, had always been a man of principle, but his time in Ward 6C had shaken his self-image. He realized how easily he had been swayed by the allure of Lisa's performances. "Even at my age," he mused, "I still have lessons to learn." He resolved to spend his remaining years imparting those lessons to his grandchildren, teaching them about integrity, gratitude, and the dangers of losing sight of what truly matters. Lisa and Adam had relocated to a quiet town in Wisconsin, where Adam began his recovery with the help of a new specialist. Lisa found work at a smaller hospital where she could focus on her nursing duties without the added weight of financial desperation. One evening, as they sat on their modest porch, Adam reached for Lisa's hand. "You did all this for me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't deserve you." Lisa smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "You're my husband, Adam. I'd do it all again if I had to." The men of Ward 6C decided to keep in touch after their discharges, forming a support group to help each other navigate their challenges. They met monthly, sharing their progress and struggles. Todd often brought Susan, who eventually forgave him as she saw the genuine effort he put into making amends. Mike attended solo, working to rebuild himself before approaching Emily again. Their shared experience bonded them, reminding them of the lessons they'd learned from Lisa and each other. Mike threw himself into physical therapy, determined to recover fully and prove to Emily that he could be the man she fell in love with. Months later, he showed up at Emily's doorstep with a bouquet of her favorite flowers. "I've been working on myself," he said. "I just hope it's not too late." Emily smiled softly. "It's a start." Todd began working overtime to repay Susan and her sister. He sold his prized car, cut back on expenses, and even started therapy to address the deeper issues that had led him astray. One evening, Susan surprised him with his favorite dinner. "I see the effort you're putting in," she said. "It means a lot." For the first time in months, Todd felt a flicker of hope. Greg graduated with honors, his time in Ward 6C a distant but pivotal memory. He wrote a heartfelt letter to Lisa, thanking her for inspiring him to keep pushing forward. "I wouldn't be here without you," he wrote. You reminded me that even in the darkest moments, there's always light. Lisa began advocating for families of long-term patience, using her own story to inspire others. She and Adam became symbols of resilience in their new community, proof that love and determination could overcome even the greatest obstacles. Ward 6C eventually returned to normal, but the lessons it imparted lingered. Men who once idolized Lisa learned the true meaning of sacrifice and loyalty. As for Lisa, she found peace in the love she'd fought so hard to protect. Though her journey had been fraught with challenges, she knew it had been worth it for Adam and for herself. The story ends with a reminder that true love isn't about fantasies. It's about seeing, appreciating, and standing by the people who've always been there.
Subscribe to our channel and turn on the bell notification for more stories like this, and give this video a thumbs up. Click on this next interesting story.